will force a reduction in revenue, and ultimately jobs are with them as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Judith Collins.
Mr. Speaker, it's always a pleasure to follow that member who's just resumed his seat. Always a thoughtful member, and although we don't always agree on things, he's a gentleman and I think a valued member of this House. Can I acknowledge, Mr. Speaker, that today is Suffrage Day, and I'm going to indulge myself by actually mentioning a few stunning women in New Zealand. Can I obviously acknowledge our head of state, the Queen, and the 60 years of service. I would like to acknowledge all women members of Parliament in the House, across the House, for their contributions, and I'd specifically like to mention two women leaders in the House, and that's the Honourable Tariana Turia and Materia Ture, who is very keen on Planet Key, and who can blame her. Can I also acknowledge the women members of the Cabinet, the Honourable Hekia Parata, Paula Bennett, Anne Tolley, Kate Wilkinson, Amy Adams and Joe Goodhue, our Minister of Women's Affairs, who does a sterling job. Can I also acknowledge in the judiciary the heads of bench, the Chief Justice Dame Sian Elias, the Chief High Court Judge Helen Winkhelman and the Chief District Court Judge Jan-Marie Doog, all appointments by National-led government. And can I acknowledge all the hard-working mothers, the grandmothers who help make all things possible. It would be remiss of me to not mention the very first woman Prime Minister New Zealand's ever had, the Right Honourable Dame Jenny Shipley. And I must say, Jenny Shipley, a woman of strength and vision, a woman I am proud to call a friend. I'd like to acknowledge Jenny for the contribution she's made to this House and what she's done since. Unfortunately today, we've had the Labour Party mired in muck all the way through question time. Were they talking about the things people want to? Were they talking about the work that Te Urawa Flavel talked about? Did they care about the people of Kawerau? No, not one bit. What they cared about was wallowing down in the muck, and actually whatever happened to the David Shearer, leader of the Labour Party, who supposedly doesn't want to talk about gotcha politics. Whatever happened to that? Whatever happened to the Mr. Clean Shearer? Well, he's gone. The entire opposition should resign, and in fact what they should do is put the Greens in there, because they're far more competent than the Labour Party, even though they've got half the number of members. And frankly, even Winston Peters is starting to look pretty good after the Labour Party, and that's saying something. But what I can say, what is this government doing? Well, we're just getting on with the business. Getting on with the business. 30-year low in crime, Mr. Speaker, down to 1982 levels, tougher sentences for criminals, for crimes against children. Instead, we've brought in legislation to help to save the community from our worst recidivist violent offenders. We've done all of those sorts of things. We've got the health system working. The health system working. $2 billion extra into it since we've been in government, the health system working. And Mr. Flavel made a very good point about the economy. This is the government that kept the hobbits in New Zealand. We kept them away from the hobbit haters on the other side of the House, the people who wanted to destroy our film industry in New Zealand by scaring away the little hobbits. Well, they'll be the first people on the red carpet turning up to premiere trying to get their photo with Peter Jackson, won't they? And oh gosh, I hope he can't be bothered with them, because quite frankly, that's what they are. And one of the other points that I heard today in the House was inflation. What has happened to the inflation? Well, let's have a look at this. The lowest inflation rate since 1999. Yes, and the lowest interest rates in 40 years. And what does that mean for ordinary New Zealanders? It means that if they've got a $200,000 mortgage, which for most New Zealanders is actually pretty standard, what about then? Well, what that means is that they're actually paying now $200 a week less on their mortgage than they were when Labor was in government. And I've heard the people on the other side suggesting that we drop the exchange rate, that we do all these sorts of things, as though this would actually be effective. Well, I tell them what it would do. Well, actually, interest rates would go up, the cost of living would go up, transport would go up, oil would go up, everything would go up, and that party over there, represented by Mr. Peters, they'd be sitting around saying, well, why aren't you doing something about it? And that is, in fact, the answer. This government's getting on to the business. The other side are talking about whinging and moaning. We're doing the job, and that's what New Zealanders want us to do.
Sue Moroney.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well,